Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me today. It's Allan Laboucan with the Rocks and Stocks News Show. I've got one of my picks on today, and I really like what they have in Arizona. It's sitting right beside the Taylor-Hermosa discovery, and I think Barksdale has something very special. Rick, thank you very much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Allan.
So, they often say a good place to look for a new deposit is where there's an old one. And I don't know which came first, what you guys have on your property or the Taylor-Hermosa. But now the ball is coming back towards your ground. And what's got me really intrigued, Rick, is that it looks like Taylor-Hermosa is the distal portion of the system that begins on your property. And, Taylor-Hermosa was taken over for a lot of money. I was fortunate to have Arizona Mining as a pick in my reports early in their discovery. And I think you've got another shot at it here.
I certainly hope so. That's what we're aiming to prove with these two drills that we have on site right now.
And let's get into a bit about the distal portion and the potential that it all could be starting on your property.
Yeah. Well, look, we have this district-wide zoning that we kind of understand broadly, right? So we have the Sunnyside porphyry. Maybe I can just mind if I throw up a slide?
Yeah, just
should be easy.
Let me make it so you can. There you go.
Cool.
Yeah, you're welcome to share screen.
Awesome. I can do the whole, Italian hand waving thing, or I can just bring up a slide and maybe that'll
there you go.
Maybe that'll make it a little bit easier, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
So as I always say, we kind of understand the general zoning in this district, right? So this Clark deposit is the uppermost portion of the Taylor system. It actually outcrops at surface, and this is very manganese rich. And then as you start getting back through Taylor and move towards Sunnyside, you go through the natural progression from kind of cooler minerals to warmer minerals. So you're picking up lead, you're picking up zinc, and then finally you're picking up copper as you get closer back towards the porphyry source. And so we understand that from not only a kind of deposit scale standpoint, but we also have a couple thousand rock chip samples from our property along all of these structural corridors that paint that same picture, right? You get copper, gold, and moly and tight, and you start stepping out into these concentric rings of different elements. So we certainly know that
non-geologist viewer out there, what Rick is describing is zonation of grade as it comes off of the original source of all that. And so you'll see these different metals coming up consistent with how far you are from the source. Did I get that right, Rick?
Exactly. You nailed it. And so there are two key things here that we ultimately want to focus on over time. And the first is tracing these high grade, kind of the axis of the high grade back towards the porphyry, right? And then the second is how many more of these CRDs are there in the district? And I would go back to kind of this old Peter McGaw adage, right? That if you think about these systems as kind of fingers radiating from a palm, your palm tends to be that porphyry, that heat source in the middle. And these CRD, mantose systems kind of radiate outwards from those heat sources. We know that Taylor is one big monstrous kind of appendage that's sitting out there, right? Peak, which is this green figure down here, kind of a newer discovery, copper dominant skarn. I think they just pulled out 140 meters of nearly 2% copper from that hole, from one of the holes there. That could be another wing here. What's around the rest of the dial, Allan? right? As you move to the north, you move all around the Sunnyside porphyry itself. Are there carbonate rocks on the other side of the porphyry? How much potential do we really have? And it's unknown. All of these holes that you see in here, with the exception of a couple of deep holes, they're shallow. They were chasing really kind of shallow calcite mineralization, brecciapite mineralization, things of that nature. So don't really understand what's going on outside of this eastern portion of the project. So it's super exciting. These are things that we're going to figure out over time, but the name of the game is latch into one of these systems and you start marching back towards the heat source. And that's what we intend to do.
And it's kind of got me really excited for a few reasons. One is that I've kind of looked at these CRDs. Have you ever seen when they put mercury in an anthill or metals in an anthill and it spreads out?
Yep.
That's what these CRD deposits look somewhat like to me. Tunnels and elevators and it spreads out. But the porphyry looks like the hole in the center of the donut, and Taylor and the Clark are the distal portion of that donut. So you're out on the edge of the donut, and you've got a lot of donut potential there, if you will. And it looks like on your map that Peak and Taylor and the northern part of Taylor all wraps around that porphyry.
Yeah. And Allan, we've done in the past an NSAMT survey, which is a kind of a geophysical method that allows you to look for resistors effectively that are deep, and you can see quite deep compared to other types of geophysics. And what you see is this big honking resistivity anomaly that kind of trends northwest southeast, which we interpret to be the carbonate rocks, which are highly resistive rocks, at depth. And so, South 32 is drilling up here just off of the slide on their Flux prospect, which is just off of the old Flux mine, which is a kind of a wedge of carbonate in a big fault system up there. But they're drilling deep into that to see if that has roots. So, presumably these carbonates can keep on going, and all around this porphyry, we've got tons of potential. So we're merely scratching the surface here. It's unfortunately I can't have 10 rigs on this project, otherwise I would. But we're going to take a nice systematic, methodical approach to kind of going from the known to the unknown, and hopefully getting kind of into the guts of the high grade system here.
And in these CRD systems, you need a few things. You need permeable rock, which the fluids can make their way up to. You need structures, and you've got a whole lot of structures there, so the fluids can make their way through into that permeable rock. And then, of course, you need mineralization. And you've got all those boxes checked off and are now drilling to learn more.
Yeah, exactly. The core of the, let's call it the axis of the high grade mineralization at Taylor kind of sits right in through here, right? Kind of southeast, northwest bearing. And it kind of links up with this east-west system of faults that we see on our property that are highly, I won't call it mineralized because they're rock chip samples, but they're very they glow. Let's put it with all sorts of interesting things.
Yeah.
And so we think that is one of those structural fluid pathways that, combined with the stratigraphic controls below, that's where you could get ponding. That's where you can get all of those kind of traps. If this was oil and gas, we'd call it a trap, right? To kind of build those replacement style carbonate deposits. And it's the intersection of those structures with that right stratigraphic piece of the puzzle. That's where we hope to see the higher grade mineralization. Like, there's no doubt in my mind, the whole area over here, this whole northeast quarter of the property probably has mantos all over it. But what we're not interested in, kind of the thin wispy bits of the system, right? Because if we get, a couple of meters of 5% zinc, it's not going to move the needle. What's going to move the needle is if we get into these structural stratigraphic traps and we have that thick, massive sulfide built up. Those are important.
And my audience is aware of this kind of a situation because of the Arizona I'm mining several years ago. But recently, I-80 Gold has been making a pretty impressive CRD discovery in Nevada. And we've been following that closely because of the high grade nature in it. And you guys are seeming to be in the early stages of something like that. And you've got more evidence in that this model you're talking about is what in fact is happening here, because there was some historical drilling that gives you confidence that this is what's happening.
Yeah, and if I back up a couple of slides, you can see some of that historic drilling here. So the discovery holes from the 80s were drilled on the Sunnyside property. That's why in the beginning of your kind of introduction, you alluded to you didn't know which one came first, so on and so forth. But the assays are down here on the bottom left, 17 meters of 17% lead zinc, 1 and a bit percent copper, and 10 ounces per ton silver, right?
Wow.
This is very high grade material, and it's one of, call it a dozen intercepts within that hole. We only talk about the big thick ones because there's not enough space on the page. But Allan, look at the resource that's next door. 150 million tons of, let's just be generous and call it 7.5% combined lead zinc, 2 ounces per ton silver.
If you were talking about that in VMS terms, that would be one of the biggest VMSs in the world.
Well, I mean, I think this is one of the largest CRD systems in the world. Quite honestly, maybe Pan American at their new discovery in Mexico could, be up there, but this one is not yet fully explored, right? So there's still this part of the system that needs to be drilled. So you already have a top 10 undeveloped lead zinc asset. You have a top 10 undeveloped silver asset in the world, and the entirety of it has not been found yet. And so we hope to show that not only do we have a important piece of it, but that it can be quite big.
Could be the whole a good portion of the donut around the donut hole.
Well, look, and this is why you bring drill rigs in. If it was a certainty, you wouldn't have to go and bring the truth machine out, right? So
exactly.
that's why we're drilling. That's what will ultimately give us the answers that we need.
You have another slide there that shows the model of Taylor and how this. There you go. This one really is a good one to understand. I mean, you're right at the property boundary. Just on your side was some historical drilling, which is why I kind of say which came first. And those are the numbers you're talking about there that shows that Taylor-Hermosa deposit continues onto your ground.
Yeah, exactly. So if I go back one slide, that section kind of, it's a bent section. So it kind of goes east-west to the porphyry, just right up here, and then hangs to the south, kind of like that. And so, property line in the middle. This is a very generalized representation of what's next door based on public info. So it's super simplified, but in reality, there are mantos and chimneys, as you alluded to earlier with your anthill, tunnel and shaft type discussion. There's also theoretically a thrust fault that comes in here and creates a repeat in the carbonate section. So it's a lot more complicated. But what we do know is that, the system continues onto our property, and that there's a big gap between the known and the unknown. So this porphyry is sitting out there, this big blue blob. And in reality, it's probably a series of nested porphyries. there are six holes into it, at least 6 deep holes. So it's not really well
So when you
understood.
say nested, that could be an indication that there was multiple events here. And that's why
Oh,
you've got something so big distal to the porphyry.
oh, there is certainly a long-lived system. That's why it's so just profuse and large, right? Because it was very long-lived. So there's multiple pulses of maybe not mineralization, but the system had multiple pulses. And so I would suggest the porphyry is going to be a series of nested porphyries. There are a series of dikes through this area. We've already drilled through a couple of them. We don't show all the complicated stuff just because in a section like this, it'll be impossible to make heads and tails of it all, right?
Got it.
But it's a very complicated system. And what we are going to do is just trace it back. So as
And then
Magar would say,
around as well.
yeah, and around, yeah, that's the next slide. Whoop, there you go.
Oh.
There's the around. So you got a kilometer east-west, but then you've got, when you kind of look around the dial, if you will, you've got multiple square kilometers of potential. Wherever you have those prospective host rocks in close proximity to the porphyry, and they can be affected by the heat and the fluid, you have the potential to build those mineralized tons. And that's what we're after. So the skarn that is undoubtedly developed along the side of this porphyry, who knows what that could even look like? It could be prolific. I mean, it could even have gold in it. There's gold in this system. Some of the old workings, they have, the old timers were going after kind of near surface veins and such. They'd have a couple grams gold in them in some spots, and we've got 20-gram rock chip samples at surface. We even have like a half a kilometer scale gold anomaly at surface. It's a couple hundred ppb. So who knows what we're going to find, but it's going to be exciting. I can tell you that.
Another thing that I find very interesting is when you look at the Taylor deposit from plan view, it seems to be going into an area of your claims that are quite large. It goes up towards the north and the west and seems to get, yeah. And so that donut could be pretty big up there.
Yeah, and you also have to understand, Alan, that the size of this deposit is also kind of limited to how far South 32 can reach with their drill steel. So they have 500 acres of patented mining claims kind of through this area, another claim down here, another one that goes this way. They don't have a permit that allows them to step off into the national forest, which all of this ground outside of those 500 acres is national forest. And so they can set a drill up on the edge of their property and kick off as far as they can, but that it's just about as far as they can reach. So I would assume that this will get bigger over time.
Yeah.
And some of it they just can't drill because they would be drilling parallel to the dip of the deposit itself, right? And so whereas you'd want to come perpendicular,
yeah,
you drill parallel to the axis, and heck, you're probably going to just bounce off of it. You may not even cut through it. So this is a monster, globally significant monster. We have a piece of it. The magical question is how important of a piece.
Yeah. So
and only time will tell.
Now the plan is you started your drilling.
Yep.
You hit a void and that created some issues. I'm interested in what could cause that void.
Yeah. So just at a high level, so the first hole was here.
Yeah.
It was a wedge off of a historic hole. And then our second drill is down here, which is in kind of a new area that hasn't been drilled before. So the first hole was a wedge off of the historic hole. So TCH2 is this vertical hole.
Yeah.
We did a wedge.
So did they leave the casing in there for you?
Yeah, the casing was in. So it was 2,500
nice.
2,500 feet of casing. So we just re-entered the old hole. It was great. We did a wedge right below the casing, which would have been kind of in this area where the mouse is. And then the hole went effectively into the page. So it would be, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between this hole and the new hole. That's why I
So
didn't put out a new,
towards us,
but away from us, into the page.
away from us, okay?
Yep, and it was going to give us let's call it a 50-meter step out at the top of the scarn zone, and then that would slowly widen as it went down.
Okay,
And what happened is we got down to 4,100, and I think we lost the hole at 4,190 feet. What happened is we hit the contact between the volcanics and the carbonates,
okay,
and you lose all your circulation. And we expected that. That's what happens on the Taylor side of the fence. It's what happened to the old timers on Sunnyside, who we know and have spoken to. And so we spent 2 days kind of regaining circulation, pumping concrete into the fractures, and then re-drilled down through the concrete. And as soon as we came through that 20-meter void,
it all
and so
dispersed.
yeah, the rods just drop, right?
Okay.
And so there's a couple of things that come from that. One, it's what you want to see from a geologic standpoint, not from a technical drilling standpoint. So from geologically, what you're seeing is a dissolution cavern, basically a karst, right? And you see these on the other side of on our neighbor's property. It's where you get a lot of fluid flow in the carbonates and they dissolve, right? You've got hot metal bearing fluids and those carbonates dissolve. And so it's what you want to see. There's a silver lining there.
Yeah.
The unfortunate part is that because we re-entered the old historic drilling, which was done on a smaller diameter NQ casing, we couldn't, it was too risky to keep the hole going.
Okay.
So typically what you would do is if you went into a small void, say 1 or 2 meters, you could pump that void full of something, concrete, sand, drill mud, whatever, and you could just drill on the other side and keep on going. And there's a reasonable expectation that that rod will find the hole at the bottom of the cave. With 20 meters, it's like hanging a string from your ceiling with a nail on it and trying to get that nail to go into a nail-sized hole on your kitchen table. And you can only move the top of the string, right? And so there's flex there. And so if you kept on drilling, you could lose the entire drill string. And not only would you have the, injury of, losing the hole, you have the insult of buying all the steel that you just lost.
Okay.
And so what you would do traditionally is if you have a larger diameter HQ hole, you go through a void, you would drill into the other side of the void, 5 or 10 feet, some distance to secure it. And then within that HQ rod, you drop down an NQ rod, which is smaller diameter, and then you keep drilling from there.
Gotcha,
and that
gotcha.
HQ rod would be your protective sleeve through that void.
keep
So
the
every
hole
single
going.
time you knew that if you pull up and change your bit and have to go back down, you know that you're going to get through it. So because we used the old hole, it was a risk, and we expected to potentially hit voids. We just never expected to hit a 20-meter one. It was a doozy. So it was just safer to cut it. We could have did another wedge, but if we had hit another void or anything else, we would be in the same boat. So I just called it and we started another one.
You'll go from a different angle?
Yeah, so we moved over 5 feet and we're putting another hole down. And I mean, it's like a -89. So it's just because you're shooting from so far away, you barely have to move the needle to get a decent step out.
Bigger diameter?
The HQ rods, yeah. Well, the top of it will actually be PQ.
Yeah.
We'll go down 500,000 feet in PQ, then we'll go HQ. Then if we ever run into any issues, or if we get down to where the rig just can't push HQ any deeper, which will be quite deep, then we can always reduce down to NQ.
So you've got the casing of the deep, thicker hole to protect you in case you have another void to go through.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they drill pretty quick up high. For instance, we're over 3,000 feet deep in our second hole, and it's been turning for about 2 weeks. So, they can move quite fast in the shallows, and then they progressively slow down as you get deeper.
So you've got two rigs there.
Yep.
One of
Yep.
them is on hole 2, and now you're going back to hole 1A, I guess you'd call it, or something.
Well, it's a whole new hole, so we're just going to call it hole 3.
Hole 3, okay,
Yeah.
okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So, you know, oftentimes when people hear this sort of stuff, they just immediately react and they don't really look at the big picture. And this is a big picture story. This is not something
Mm.
that you know, you should get too panicked about, especially when you look at it from the positive side, which is geologically, there's a good reason that you've got that void.
Yes.
Big.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, it's a speed bump in my mind, right? If we'd lost that hole in some structural zone up in the volcanics and we never got to that contact with the carbonates, that we didn't have all the information that we got along the way, it would have been more calamitous. Or if that hole kept on going and we never hit the carbonates and then we lost it much deeper than the projection, that would have been an issue. But the hole lined up quite well with what we expected geologically. It performed the way we thought it was going to perform as far as losing circulation, regaining it. We tested a lot of things. Our systems worked. Then we hit a bloody 20-meter void. And so at the end of the day, it's just a speed bump. We'll be back down in the same spot, call it 3.5 weeks, depending on how the other hole goes. And then we will carry on.
Good. So, what's the cash situation like? You guys are well cashed up to poke a bunch of holes. Is that the story?
Yeah, we've got a couple million in the bank, which will get us through the end of the year with drilling.
Okay.
We could probably skate in on fumes next year, you know, with the cash that we have, but I don't like being on fumes. So at some point before the end of the year, we'll probably do a financing, but you know, we're talking to a couple of different groups about potential ways to do that and what have you. So, you know, we don't like to kind of be the traditional guys. So hopefully we can figure that out and surprise everybody. And yeah.
So you've got the potential of some drill holes release before the end of the year.
Oh yeah, before the end of the year, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
and we'll even probably have assays out on the second hole before the end of the year, or at least the upper portions of the second hole.
Okay.
We plan on doing visual releases on this program. The holes take so long, and we're looking for massive sulfide, so we plan on doing visuals. We will not estimate grades.
Yes.
And we will not provide pictures. But what we will do is we will put cross sections up and we will show the geology along the way, the thickness of the zones and where they occur. So that way people can kind of judge that against expectations, right? If something's deeper or shallower, if there's more zones, less zones, they'll be able to see that the model is working or not working. Then the assays will speak for themselves when they come out.
And you're looking for sulfide, so it's not like you're looking at a little tiny vein with visible gold in it and that sort of stuff. So I do encourage companies to try to keep people as well informed along the way as they can. I mean, this is the fun of why we do the business, this exploration stuff, Rick. And you know, if you can sort of in a technical, competent way that's representative of what you're doing, bring people into the process of what you're doing. I think that that's a good thing. So
if the stock exchange would let me, I'd have something on the website that every day would show you where the drill was on a depth standpoint, because it's a question I get every single day. It'd be just nice if it was in a spot where everyone can look at it, but the exchange won't let you do that. But you know, we'll put out results based on visuals once we get down to where, you know, we suspect targets to be. And then the fact of whether we hit those targets or not, where we think that we will or not, those are the important pieces of information I think the investors ultimately want to see. And then the grades of those intersections will ultimately follow on, you know, in due course. So those are the important bits.
Well, thank you very much, Rick, for coming on the show to tell everybody what you guys are doing and why you're doing it and the big picture. And we have to do this again.
Absolutely. Hopefully I have a humdinger of a hole at some point, and you know, we can show pretty pictures and talk about that.
Well, like they say, the best place to look for humdinger holes is next to where there are humdinger holes. So I think you're in the right address.
Yeah, from your lips to God's ears.
Thanks a lot, Rick. I'm going to wrap things up, and we'll talk at the other end there.
All right. Cheers.
Okay, there you go, folks. So Barksdale Resources, I'm really excited about this project, and you know it goes to the whole big picture. You know, you're right beside a world-class discovery, and it looks like what caused that world-class discovery is on Barksdale's ground, and they've got a lot of ground to explore, and they're underway with their drilling, and I think things are going in the right direction, and we'll have more to talk about. I'll keep my fingers crossed for you as well, Rick. But it was very nice for Rick to come on and give us an update on what's going on with the drilling. And I expect that they're going to have a lot to talk about in the not too distant future. As always, my shows are for information purposes only. It's important for you to speak with your financial advisors to assess whether this meets your risk profile. I've been at this business for 30 years in exploration, and you know, this company definitely ticks off the boxes of what I look for. And they also do a great job of in their news releases and on their corporate presentations of showing what they're doing. So I advise you highly to do your homework and check that stuff out as well. On that note, have a great day, and we will talk to you soon.